What's up, guys? Welcome to Identity Labs, where we help ambitious men fix the bad habit that's keeping them from the next level. So, if that sounds like something you may be able to relate to, whether that be your finances, maybe you're a salesman or you're an entrepreneur, and you're like, man, if I could just get myself to be consistent or disciplined or all of these buzz terms, productive, right? Then I would get to the next level. And that's actually a myth, right? I'm going to show you why in a moment. Or maybe it's health for you. Maybe you think like, okay, I need to get that six pack in for the summer. Or maybe you want to lose a couple pounds and you're like, man, if I could just get myself to stay consistent in the gym, stay disciplined. Also a lie. Then you would make the change. Or maybe it's relationships. Maybe you have approach anxiety and you're like, man, why can't I just do what I see the girl, I know what to do. I've watched the videos, I've read the book, I've gone to all the Tony Robbins seminars, but I just can't get myself to do what I know I'm supposed to do. Yes, if that sounds like you, on any level or all of the above, stay tuned, because what you're going to learn in this training in all the videos is why that happens, how to fix it, but more importantly, how to make sure it never repeats. See, the thing that is often given online are what are called temporary solutions, to where you need to use a lot of discipline and force, and it's this other thing on your plate on top of all of the other busy things you have to do. And now it's this new productivity hack that you have to remember. And then if you fall off, you feel bad, and it's like, then you're in this cycle, overwhelmed, burnt out. And then it's like, man, you lose a little bit more trust for yourself. You try again because you're an ambitious guy. You know that you deserve to be at a greater space than you are right now, if you could just get yourself to do what you needed to do. And so if you can relate to that, then trust and believe you're going to want to stay tuned for this. And I'm actually going to show you how I relate and how I came into the information I'm going to share with you guys, because I was exactly in that position, right? About 22, graduated college, and at the time graduated bachelor's in psychology. And I'm like, okay, what do I want to do with my life, right? Do I want to go in traditional sit on the couch kind of life and go about helping people transform in that way? Or was it going to be something different, right? And so because I didn't know the answer, I accepted a job at a residential mental health facility. And I was like, okay, I want to see what a, psychiatrist, psychologist, day-to-day life and day-to-day job would be like before I make that decision. So was a behavioral specialist, worked with boys 11 to 18, give or take, and I had one of the worst cottages. And that ended up to be one of the best things that ever happened to me, because now I work with men primarily. And, I don't think I give enough credit to that season and how it molded me and prepared me for the work that I do now. But who cares about what I do? It's about what you are going to get. And so around that time, I realized that, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but much of the boys weren't changing that quickly. Now, I'm not saying that, a psychiatrist comes in and gives a, magical incantation and then poof, you're supposed to be transformed. However, from my point of view, at least at the time, I knew this was not the pathway for at least quick and permanent changes, right? And so I ended up leaving that position, right? I went into sales, and that was a whole different journey, right? I went into entrepreneurship, and I was like, I still had that ambition. I knew I still wanted to help men. And frankly, I also wanted to make a lot of money. I wanted to be able to get the women I want to want me. And I wanted to just be in amazing shape, right? So it was health, relationships, finances. And so I figured, okay, I'm going to start an image consulting firm, because I, was in the suiting business. And like, I'm going to start an image consulting firm. It's going to have a barber shop and a salon, and you can get buy your suits there, and you may get some alcohol. And so to do all this, I needed money. So I was like, okay, let me get into sales. However, I learned that sales requires this thing they say called discipline, right? The myth of discipline. And I didn't have a lot of it, right? I struggled to make myself go approach the stranger, and I'd get discouraged after a while, and da-da-da-da. And while, you know, a big part of it was that I didn't like the product, but more importantly, every day felt like a drag, right? Every day felt like, man, it took everything in me to just, and at the time I was getting up 4 a.m. to go to the gym, you know, like there were all these different things, writing books, and everything just felt like a absolute monumental task every day. And I was wondering, why is that? Don't I want these things? Why would I be so trained and feel like it requires, again, so much force to do things that I claim I want? So around that time, I would go through these cycles, right? I would watch the Tony Robbins, the David Goggins. I'd get, right, and I'd do all of it, right? I'd constantly have a carousel of YouTube videos in the background of inspirational interviews and, you know, some Jocko Willink vid about, you know, you just got to do it, and all the things, right? All my movements were generated from external motivation, which didn't add up because, again, I didn't lack the ambition. So why wasn't I following through? Right? Why couldn't I, most importantly, sustain the changes? So after a couple of years, burning out, trying again, burning out, trying again, burning out, trying again, 2020 came around and it was COVID. Now, at the time, the girl I was with, we ended up taking a break. It was a few weeks removed from my birthday, and it was March, and everything was going down, right? Shut down, going down. We don't know what's going on. So for the first time in, you know, arguably history, and just definitely in my lifetime, I had nothing that I had to do. I had the time. And at the time they were giving out the stimulus money. So I even had the money, and just, I didn't have to spend a ton of money to drive, go to work, all the things. So the two excuses I thought were in my way was always, man, if I had more time, I'd be consistent. I'd write that book. I'd launch that course. I'd go further in the business. I'd make the calls. If I had the money. And now I had more of both than I'd had in my entire life. And so for the next 2 weeks, I found myself, day 14, looking in the mirror, ashamed. Why? Because I used those entire 2 weeks to do absolutely nothing, going to bed late, overeating, you know, dating apps, all kinds of nonsense. Nothing that I said I was going to do. And so looking in the mirror, this was a very, 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 very painful moment. I remember it vividly. It was the morning after another late night binge, and there were like slight bags under my eyes, and there was just this energy of disgust around me. And I looked myself in the mirror and I said, "You're a fraud. You are full of shit." Right? You had all this talk, all these ambitions, and now look at you when nobody's around. I'm sure you felt that before. And so, kind of feeling stuck, I asked myself a question that would forever change my life. I asked myself, how would a man need to live? How would a man need to live to look himself in the mirror every morning with full respect for himself, with full admiration for himself? And so that began a journey that brought me here. As after that, I immediately, because, you know, it's COVID, so we can sit around. There were a lot of courses at the time. Jordan Peterson was very big, if you're familiar with him. And he was very big in the, you know, talking about manhood and masculinity and, responsibility, things of that nature. And so I didn't know exactly where I was going to start. I wanted to find the fundamental equation that explained all of human behavior, right? And I knew it had to exist. Why? Because it can't be random. If something is random, it can never repeat. And since my poor behaviors would always repeat and other people's behaviors would repeat, that means human behavior also has some underlying structure that causes us to do what we do. And I knew there was an answer. There was a first principle to this, but I didn't know where to even begin. So I began wherever I could. And so Jordan Peterson at the time had a course called Maps of Meaning. And so I was like, okay, I can do that. And so I studied all of it, right? I started studying everything, reading everything under the sun. But we all know, as I'm sure you do, you're probably well read, reading doesn't change behavior. And so after gathering the data, I realized, okay, in applying it to my life, I was still watching David Goggins and rah-rah and push-ups in the morning. And that started to build some momentum. But I knew our buddy discipline was going to let me down sooner or later. And I could not take another hit to my self-respect, right? I just took a massive one. And so I'm like, oh shit, I'm going to burn out at some point. So I'm like, okay, what can we do? And so I started applying things gradually, trying to understand and observe my own behavior. And this is the key thing. Fortunately, I also, at the time, had a group of 2,500 males for the most part. There were some women in there, but men for the most part. And I happened to be, even though I don't even know how this ended up happening, but I ended up being like more or less the psychologist for all of them. And so I'd get hundreds of DMs, and I've had thousands of conversations on all things under the sun, from people wanting to hurt themselves. I won't go into that, to literally anything you can think of, the darkest to maybe something a little lighter, like, okay, why won't I take a shower every day, right? And so after having that many conversations, I started to document. I started to develop these forms that people would fill out. And I started doing these studies, all to find the human behavioral equation. I'm like, there has to be a pattern underneath all this. And so after years, about 3-4 years of just documenting hundreds of guys, and we'd go over the data and we try again and apply and boom. And after a while, I started to observe a pattern, not just in their behavior, right? Because with all that data, you can start to see patterns. But I started to see patterns in the pattern beneath the pattern. These were called identity scripts. These were these things that seemed to be running us like the gears in the background, right? These were like in The Wizard of Oz, the guy behind the curtain. That is why discipline is required, right? And so as I started to see, I'm like, hold on, these little things back here are actually what's controlling everybody, right? And so I was like, okay, let's see if we can like change these, or are these alterable? Like, what makes some people change and what makes some people not? What makes some people change permanently? Why some people don't? What makes some people change quickly and some people take a long time? And all these questions I had to have the answer to, right? I was voracious. I was obsessed with understanding this, because I knew if I cracked the code on that, I don't have to deal with this guy anymore, right? I could just do what I know I need to do when I need to do it, and I'd have no friction. And that's what I wanted. And so I said, okay, let's figure this out. And so I started going and applying the technology that I developed after working with those hundreds of men for free within my practice. And so I started to notice, now this was both men and women, these are, I was going to say miraculous, but it really did feel like that. These ridiculously quick changes for things people were struggling with for years, right? And they were just, and at the time I was applying this stuff on myself. But the point wasn't to just have this anecdotal, oh, well, it works for me, therefore it works for everybody else. I'm a scientist. So I had to know empirically if this stuff was true. If it worked in all cases, then it must be true. It must be a fundamental structure. If I was seeing exceptions, then that means I don't understand something. And so we kept replicating that over and over and over till all exceptions dissolved, and we started to apply technologies that no matter what the person was dealing with, if they apply it, gone. And this was really big because at the time, you've heard of affirmations and the productivity hacks and all these techniques that just add more to your plate, and then you can't sustain it afterwards. And then it's the new productivity hack, and it's like, man, I don't want to see another productivity hack. I don't want to hear another affirmation. I don't want to hear another self-development book for the rest of my life, right? I just want to get to the core and the cause and change so I can go on to the next level of the success that I know I deserve. And so that's where I was. I did not want another hack. I wanted the truth, the true core architecture of behavior. And that's what we ended up finding, right? We ended up finding that these things called identity scripts actually govern everything. And if you can crack the code and get to the core of these scripts, then you can change anything quickly and permanently. And so, of course, not a man of theory. So again, started applying this to guys, and primarily guys within the practice, because I had a dating coaching practice at the time. And so while they didn't know this, I started to realize that nothing changes if identity remains the same. I'll say that again. Nothing changes if identity remains the same. So because of that, I'm like, I know if I give them everything under the sun, they won't do it. Or if they do it, they won't sustain it. So we had to alter the identity. But they didn't know that, right? They just figured, okay, well, this is some self-help stuff, right? But not understanding this was some of the most high-tech, we could say, identity technology on the planet. And so, boom, they don't realize, man, it's crazy. I just feel way different. Now, understanding that they just rewired and re-engineered their entire identity in a 20-minute writing exercise, right? So, and that's just one of the many, right? But that was one of the simple ones. And so we're like, okay, I think it's time that we started to share this with other people. And so things started to grow and grow and grow and expand. And that is where we got to where we are now, which is how Identity Lab was born, to teach what we call identity engineering, which is the process of making any negative behavior change permanently, not because we attacked the behavior, but because we altered the identity, most specifically the identity script. And so if that's something you want to know how that works, if you want to discard discipline so you can move from force to flow, then stay tuned. In the next video, I'm going to break down exactly how all of it actually works.